he had to lead his troops into battle, and so the other thing he figured out was the question of succession, of who would take over for the emperor, who would be the next emperor, needed an orderly process. And so what he said was the Augustus would pass on to his, essentially, vice president, if we can use those terms. So the Eastern Empire was, at this point, portion of the empire was a little more prominent and had more resources. But in any case, Diocletian is what we would call a traditional Roman in terms of he believed in Roman destiny. Maybe we could apply anachronistically the American concept of manifest destiny backwards to Rome. And the idea here is, hey, we have a calling in this world, and that is to bring those who are not subject to us under our jurisdiction for not just our good, but for their good, and to be brought under what is famously called the Pax Romana. So early Roman religion was very much an early ancestor cult, kind of feeding into this idea of a divine destiny for Rome. In fact, they even had virgins in the city of Rome whose whole job it was to keep the flame of Rome, the light, lit at all times, the temple of the goddess Vesta. And these virgins tended the fire. That probably got rather monotonous over time, but that was the reality. Well, Diocletian was not just a Roman in the traditional mold, but his approach to Christians was really quite hostile. So you remember from last week, Decius in the mid-3rd century, that was the example of the first empire-wide persecution. But now, under Diocletian, he determines that really the Roman government should stop accommodating to Christian believers. He believed, even if they weren't rebellious, that they were compromising the unity of the Roman Empire. If you remember back to the beginning of the class, one of the claims of the apologists, of the Christian apologists, was saying, hey, look, we are actually willing to be Roman citizens, or we're willing to participate in Roman life in as much as it is not idolatrous, right? And so one of the early defenses of the faith was, hey, we're willing to live in Rome and to some extent do what Rome does, dress, eat, keep certain schedules and habits, as long as it doesn't compromise our faith, right? As long as it doesn't compromise our allegiance to Christ. But Diocletian and other emperors like him would say, no, because of your claim to an exclusive religion and exclusive worship of God, plus the fact that Christianity had its own form of universalism. Now, I'm not talking about the theological view of no one is judged or no one is condemned in the end, but universalism from the standpoint that Christ will rule and does rule over all the nations, and it's the obligation of the church to preach the gospel, right, under all creation. This concept for an emperor like Diocletian was threatening, right? It was the idea that you are undermining what Rome is and what Rome does. So in 303, this is an important date, after consulting the oracle of Apollo at Didyma in Western Asia Minor, Diocletian determined to ramp up the mistreatment of Christians, or the tightening the screws to give up their worship of Christ and return to the worship of the Roman gods. So in a dawn raid in this year, soldiers plundered the Christian church in Nicodemia, burned the scriptures, and razed the building. The next day, an edict was published ordering that churches across the empire were to be destroyed, Christians forbidden to assemble, and scriptures handed over to authorities to be cast into flames. Now, this is really quite remarkable because in the Roman world, you didn't see a lot of book burning, right? This is actually quite a scandal and quite alarming for those who had seen it. We remember back to the book of Acts where the converts at Ephesus decide to burn their own dark art magic books, but that was their own decision, right, to burn books, not books that are confiscated and then burned. So this is really kind of a radical step that is taken under Diocletian to confiscate copies of the scriptures. The other thing, frankly, is books at this time are very expensive. I mean, for us, a paperback Bible, we could probably get it for $1, right? But these, a lot of these scriptures had belonged, right, to the church, to the assemblies, were very expensive. And along with this, some of the bishops were also arrested. So 303 marks what's called the Great Persecution, or the beginnings of the Great Persecution. But it was really too late because, as we've heard before, by this time there was a significant presence in terms of the population that were Christian believers. Too many people willing to hide Christians, too many people willing to resist. Nevertheless, the Great Persecution, which lasted for about 18 months' time, left a deep wound on the church and made believers very skittish and to some extent anxious relative to the Roman authority. Okay, so that's helpful, I think, in terms of background now as we transition to Constantine. So Constantine comes on the scene in the context of this delicate tetrarchy, mentioning there the four different emperor system. Constantius is his father. Helena is his mother. His father is Caesar of Britain, Gaul, and Spain, and then becomes Augustus of West as Maximian abdicated in 305. So in 306, his father, Constantius, dies, and the troops of his son Constantine declare Constantine the Augustus in the city of York. And so if you've ever visited York, England, there's actually still a statue of the place where he was coronated, and it's really quite impressive. He sits there looking quite pensive with a sword in his hand. You can look up pictures of this. But the fact that it sits right near the Cathedral of York is also going to be quite interesting, and we'll get on to that in a little bit. Well, Maxentius in Rome also claimed the title of Augustus, and he is in the capital in Rome, so his, they say possession is 9/10 of the law, right? So it's like if Constantine claims he's emperor and Maxentius claims he's emperor, well, there's going to have to be a showdown. And that's what takes place at what is known as the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312. Maxentius apparently consulted oracles that told him to leave the city to meet Constantine in northern Italy at Milvian Bridge. But it turns out this decision was a really foolish one from a military standpoint, because he went from a fortified place to then meeting Constantine and his armies in the open and vulnerable position there. So in 310, Constantine had evidently seen the sign of the cross on the sun while marching with his troops in Gaul. It's hard to know, someone says they see something, and you're like, well, what actually happened? Some historians have noted that there's an example of a rare occurrence on a winter afternoon where the sun is surrounded by two circles, and to the left and to the right, and extending out, they form an image because there's a line that's going across that resembles a cross. Well, it's hard to know objectively what happened, but in any case, Constantine claims to have seen this, and on the eve of the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312, he has this dream, and evidently heard this phrase, tuto Nico, or in this conquer. So in the sign of the cross, conquer or gain the victory. The company Nike, related to that word victory, right, or conquer there. So he instructs his soldiers to prepare a new military standard with Chi, and then a line down the middle. And if you look at the back of the page, you'll see this turns into Chi Rho. So Chi is the Greek letter, so we spell Christos. In Greek, beginning with this letter, and the second letter would be Rho. So Chi Rho is eventually what it became, and this became the symbol of that Constantine placed there. And so this is actually from the facade of St. John Lateran in Rome, and it's founded in 324 during the reign of Constantine, and so you can see an example there of that. It's interesting to me that in the present day, Elon Musk has a fascination with the letter X, but it has no religious, in his own mind, significance. But for Constantine, Chi was imbued with this sense of the Christological power and, again, the sense of destiny that Christ told him, I'm going to be with you, and you're going to conquer in this. Now, just note here, Constantine, as most in the Roman world, believed that the gods, the divine, guided humanity through signs, often through heavenly signs. Here's a nice summary of the worldview of the time. Shirley Jackson Chase writes, "The sky hung low in the ancient world. Traffic was heavy on the highway between heaven and earth. Gods and spirits thickly populated the upper air, where they stood in readiness to intervene at any moment in the affairs of mortals. And demonic powers emerging from the lower world or resident in the remote corners of the earth were a constant menace to human welfare. All nature was alive with supernatural forces." I think that's a good way of putting it. And remember, some 1,200 years later, there's a monk from Eisleben who's making his way at night. Lightning strikes. He says, "St. Anne, I'll become a monk." Martin Luther took this, lightning as a divine word to him. So I think even up to that point, 1500 or thereabouts, as a message from God. So just to show you, there's a continuity there. Yes? So Rho is the second letter in Greek of Christ, so Christos. So this right here. So Chi Rho are the first two letters of Christ's name in Greek. Yeah. Yes, sir. Chi Rho, yes. Yeah. Questions so far? Correct, yeah. So there's this whole debate of, if you say Xmas instead of Christmas, you're quote unquote taking the Christ at Christmas. Well, you're only doing so if you don't know Greek, right? So, but yeah, and I think that actually shows you the secular age in which we live, in which people say, X, that's just a letter, right? And maybe having some instruction there of, hey, this is actually a Christian terminology, and definitely very important to Constantine. Okay, so Constantine, as you can imagine, won the Battle of Milvian Bridge and becomes emperor of the West there soon after. Now, in terms of his own faith, a lot of our understanding of Constantine is mediated through Eusebius, and it's a little bit dicey because Eusebius, if you've ever read Boswell's Life of Johnson, Samuel Johnson, Boswell was just always fawning over Samuel Johnson. You could just have nothing bad to say about Dr. Johnson. Well, that is Eusebius relative to Constantine. He never criticizes him. In fact, we'll get into this in the Nicene Creed, but he says when Constantine walked into the Council of Nicaea, he walked in with these purple robes and almost this glow about him so that he looked like an angel. And I think that Eusebius really believed that. I think that, he was, like from our standpoint, overstating it. But, so Eusebius, one of Constantine's court historians, so it's a little bit difficult, but I do think this Good Friday sermon that Constantine gave, it does seem to be authentic, though that's debated. Of course, everything in history is debated, but and this is the only sermon that Eusebius appended to his Vita Constantini, which is his life of Constantine. And so apparently Constantine preached a lot in his palace. Some people didn't like that as much as others, but I dare any one of the court to challenge the emperor to do what he wants to do. But anyway, turn to the back of the page again, and we won't read the whole thing, but just to give you a flavor of where Constantine is with respect to his own understanding. The first part, he basically says that nature has blessed us, or God through what we would call general revelation has blessed the creatures. But now let's skip to the first underlined section. But principles quite opposed to nature have mightily prevailed, in that men have agreed in withholding his rightful worship from the Lord of all, believing that the order of the universe depended not on his providence, but on the blind uncertainty of chance, and this notwithstanding the clearest announcement of the truth by his inspired prophets, whose words should have claimed belief, but were in every way resisted by that impious wickedness which hates the light of truth and loves the obscure mazes of darkness. Now, as a side note, I think Constantine probably got some help from speechwriters or sermon writers to put this together. It's quite lengthy. You can look up on ccel.org. Christian Classics Ethereal Library, I think is the title, and it's a very good repository of Christian texts from history. But anyway, one of Constantine's beliefs was that God has revealed himself in truth through nature, but that the Christian God is also the heavenly judge who is going to show his judgment against those who oppose him. So God will destroy those who destroy his temple. I think looking at the second underlying quote here, we can see that borne out. For after he had enlightened the world by the glorious discretion and purity of his character, and had ascended to the mansions of his Father's house, he founded his church on earth as a holy temple of virtue, an immortal, imperishable temple, wherein the Spirit, the worship due to the Supreme Father and to himself should be piously performed. But what did the insane malice of the nations hereupon devise? Their effort was to reject the grace of Christ. And so, in short, I think he saw the history of Rome as the open door of the gospel going forth, but to a large extent, at least at first, a rejection of the Christian message. And that rejection is not going to come without consequences. In other words, is Constantine's view. And I think he, in his own perspective, believed he was kind of righting the ship and helping to turn the Roman subjects to the true worship of the true God, an effort to unhitch Rome from paganism as in the past. So he believed that error, doctrinal error, is, quote, accompanied with violence and cruelty. He was not one, I think, who believed in what we would call harmless lies, lies that don't do any harm. Well, what else did he do? He closed pagan temples. He ended sacrifices, that is, Roman sacrifices, pagan sacrifices on official occasions. In some cases, he moved cult items and melted down metal objects. And what did he do? He donated what was melted down to Christian buildings, Christian churches, tearing off the doors of some pagan temples and removing idolatrous images from others. Well, there's a question about whether Constantine issued a blanket prohibition against all pagan sacrifice, but it seems that the record is clear that at the very least he prohibited provincial governors from offering sacrifice at state-sponsored functions, and in doing so, he actually opened the door for Christians to serve in civil capacities like civil governors, because previously a lot of Christians would say, well, I'm not going to be a governor because that would require me to offer these sacrifices. But now that they're dispensed with, a lot of Christians now feel free to participate. So he kind of detethers a lot of Rome's official acts from its kind of pagan worship activity. All right, any questions there on the emperor with a sense of mission? Yes?
Well, do we know or can we know any sort of relationship between Constantine and the Bishop of Rome at this time?
That's a good question. I haven't done much study on that, so I'm not sure, yeah. Interestingly, Constantine wasn't actually baptized until his deathbed. And you remember going back to earlier church history, there had been this view that if you had committed certain kinds of sins after your baptism, you were in danger of losing your salvation. And so there's actually quite a number, not just Constantine, quite a number of people who professed the Christian religion, but actually were not baptized until their last moments. Yes?
Did you say Christian Coptic Library?
Yeah, Christian Classics Ethereal Library, CCEL.
What's that second C?
Christian Classics.
Oh,
Classic, yeah. Yeah. All right, so let's now turn to the Edict of Milan. Licinius is emperor of the eastern portion of the empire at this point, and he and Constantine meet in Milan in 313, and the occasion was actually the marriage of Constantine to Licinius's sister, and basically what they do is they reach an agreement, and the agreement fundamentally was what we would call freedom of worship for all, including Christians. So, in other words, the state is not going to categorize certain religions as illegal and others as tolerated. So it also restored property, the edict did, and possessions lost to the churches since the great persecution of 303. So about a decade later, right, some of these churches still hadn't received their properties back, and the agreement between Licinius and Constantine was for those to be restored. Well, Christians and all others should have freedom to follow the kind of religion they favor. And so this really marks a watershed moment in Western history in the sense that the citizens are now free to decide, right, what religion they align with. And I think there's a good argument to be made that, for example, the First Amendment of our U.S. Constitution, freedom of worship and assembly, has its precedent here in the Edict of Milan. But one result is, frankly speaking, Constantine makes it much less weird to be a Christian. You remember earlier in the class, it was very odd. You're sticking out like a sore thumb, right, in terms of your Christian piety and confession. And the other thing, too, is under Constantine, martyrdom starts to become less idealized. One historian notes, now that persecution had ceased, there was little opportunity in civil life to imitate the fortitude, the vigor, or the spectacular defiance of the martyrs. So we talked about this, right, from the 3rd century. One of the great things to be able to do was to be martyred for your faith. But now that Christianity kind of comes into alignment with the kind of legal apparatus of the Roman Empire, that is less admired, and even to find examples of this become, of course, more and more rare. Well, it's later in the century, under Emperor Theodosius, that Christianity is actually declared the official religion of the Roman Empire. And that's important to note historically, because some say, oh yeah, Constantine, wasn't he the one that made Christianity, quote, the legal religion, the only religion of the... That's not true. So it was under Theodosius, I think in 380 or thereabouts. Questions about the Edict of Milan? All right, we move to the Council of Nicaea. So this just shows you the kind of world it was, because here they sit down for wine or coffee or something in Milan, but 11 years later, in 324, they clash. And their armies clash outside of Chalcedon across the Bosporus in Asia Minor, and Constantine's army is victorious over Licinius's army. After the battle, Licinius offered his imperial purple cloak to Constantine as an act of homage, and his life was spared, but a year later, he would lose his head. Constantine enters Nicomedia, the imperial capital in the east, and he is now the sole ruler of the Roman Empire. Well, now that he's defeated the Eastern emperor, what does he find out? Well, he actually finds out there's a lot of problems in the church, particularly in the eastern portion, stemming a lot from the region of Alexandria. And we're going to get into the Council of Nicaea from the theological standpoint later. But for now, Constantine decides it's good for the church as well as good for the empire to summon the first ecumenical council. Now, other councils had taken place before this, but they were regional, right? So if you had the Council of Carthage, right? Or you could have a Council of Rome where the Roman presbyters would gather. But now for the first time, Constantine says, let's gather all the bishops we can from representative portions of the whole world to resolve this Christological controversy, particularly stemming from the teaching of Arius. You can make a case that the Westminster Assembly, called by the Long Parliament of England in 1643 to bring reform to the Church of England, that really the plausibility structure for a civil magistrate calling for or summoning the church to resolve certain doctrinal disputes, that's actually, the foundation for that has been laid by Constantine, right? That he is the emperor to really first sponsor this notion and to underwrite this. So Constantine not only summons this council, but he also determines to attend, but he stands at the doors and he waits for the bishops to give him an official invite inside there. By the way, why Nicaea? Well, there's actually not any churches, or there weren't any significant churches in that region, and part of it was they didn't want the local church to be able to put their finger on the scales and have undue influence there. But it's just hard for me to imagine, just as a thought experiment, this is not a political statement, but like President Trump showing up for an OPC General Assembly, right? The commissioners, to a man, would say it's not proper to, have him seated here. But the other thing, of course, is the OPC is not huge enough for our president. But Constantine, in his role, really sees himself as a kind of bishop of bishops. He oversees the work of the bishops in their labors to bring unity to the church. Eusebius says in his Life of Constantine, like some general bishop constituted by God, Constantine convened the synod of his ministers. So again, we can ask the question, was it proper for him to do this? Yeah, we can certainly ask that question, but I don't think any of us would question that the results of the council, in terms of the work on the creed, were certainly fruitful and beneficial for the church. The other thing to note, too, is in the Nicene gathering, there was a determination of what the date of Easter should be. So it should be calculated by the Roman and Alexandrian reckoning rather than what was known as the Quarto-Deciman rule, which made Good Friday coincide with the 14th Nisan of the Jewish Passover. And so Constantine is kind of not favorable to Jewish influence on Christian theology, and he kind of, even in terms of the timing of Easter, separates out the Jewish reckoning from the Roman reckoning. Other official acts flowing from his support of Christian principles, he made Sunday an official holiday, so that's 321. He exempted the clergy from paying taxes. He moved the capital of the empire to Byzantium, which he refounded as a Christian city, and then, of course, named for himself, Constantinople, now Istanbul. The church became a recognized corporation in Roman law, which gave it the right to own property. Church affairs were regulated by law, and the state enacted legislation to this effect. And Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch were recognized as the most important churches, for example, under Nicaea, and territorial dioceses were created corresponding to Roman provinces. So you can start to see some of the issues that are forming here is that kind of the quote-unquote big steeple churches are found in the places of significance in terms of the Roman Empire. All right, so we have the beginnings of Christendom. If you want to look up the Edict of Thessalonica in 381, which I mentioned in terms of Theodosius making Christianity the legal religion of the empire, I'll leave that to you for later. In terms of architecture, the cruciform shape made from the long nave basilica became a standard cathedral form. Constantine's conversion was a response to the victorious sign of the cross. The cross became a fitting symbol of sacred space. So if you visited any cathedral in Europe, clearly these are very public and very permanent structures, and it's hard to imagine how these would have been constructed without the influence of Emperor Constantine granting the Christian church full legal status in the Roman Empire. Well, we're running out of time, so I want to make a few assessments. So some are very cynical about Constantine. Just to pick one, Dan Brown, the author of that entertaining but also tendentious book, The Da Vinci Code, says that Constantine's support of Christianity was nothing other than a matter of, quote, backing the winning horse. In other words, Constantine wakes up and realizes, hey, if I can't beat these guys, I better join them, right, because he saw Christianity on the ascendancy. Well, of course, that is a very cynical outlook. The opposite, I would say, represented by our own American theologian Jonathan Edwards, and he's not alone in this. He shares with many of the European reformers. Under Constantine, he argues the church was, quote, brought to a place of great peace and prosperity, quote, heathen magistrates were put down, and only Christians were advanced to places of authority. Edwards writes, Christ's coming in Constantine's time was accompanied with a glorious spiritual resurrection of the greater part of the known world, in it a restoration of it to a visible church state from a state of heathenism. Well, it's very difficult to read Providence, and I think this is one of the challenges in terms of studying church history. There's a difference between affirming the doctrine of God's sovereignty, which of course as good Reformed Christians we all do, but then extrapolating the reason that this happened was because God wanted to do this. You see the difference between those two things? And so in Edwards' mind, Constantine's very clear. He's the fulfillment of prophecy, right? Isaiah 60, kings shall come to your light, nations to the brightness of your rising. But of course, the Bible itself doesn't give us a post-canonical way to say, yeah, this moment here fulfills this prophecy here, right? So we're in a little bit of a epistemic dilemma from that standpoint. But here's where I would stand. And I think Timothy Barnes represents it well, where he says, from the days of his youth, Constantine probably had been sympathetic to Christianity. Around 310, he experienced a religious conversion which profoundly affected his conception of himself. After 312, Constantine considered that his main duty as emperor was to inculcate virtue in his subjects and to persuade them to worship God. Constantine's character is not wholly enigmatic. With all his faults and despite an intense ambition for personal power, he nevertheless sincerely believed that God had given him a special mission to convert the Roman Empire to Christianity. So my own personal view from my own research on this is I think he did have a genuine Christian faith, but at some points as an emperor, he did use the Christian faith to his advantage. And there's a lot of ways in which it becomes kind of politically expedient for him to advance the Christian cause. And then there's also a category confusion that can take place, and you can well imagine this. I'm a Christian. I've been made holy by God's word, set apart for his purposes. I'm an emperor, therefore the head of the state. Therefore, if I'm holy and I declare a war, then that's a holy war, right? And the extension, and again, extrapolation from that becomes rather problematic. So here I would point to Augustine, writing a little less than a century after Constantine became emperor. And what's interesting about him is Augustine says, yeah, look, there was a lot of great things that happened under Constantine. But he then goes on to say, lest any emperor should become a Christian in order to merit the happiness of Constantine, when everyone should become a Christian for the sake of eternal life, God took Jovian away far sooner than Julian. So Jovian, a Christian emperor, Julian, definitely not a Christian. His nickname, Julian the Apostate. But you see, Augustine is very modest about connecting one's earthly success to your standing in the kingdom of God. And in that sense, I think very discerning. Now, there's a slightly more complicated question, and that is with regard to the matters concerning church and state. So theologically, I'm not in support of a state church. I don't see a biblical basis for covenanting between the church and the state, as our brothers in the RPCNA, they're known as the Covenanters, right, for that very reason. But at the same time, I happen to find it preferable. Now, maybe I'm like Garfield the cat, and I'm somewhat wanting to be at ease, but I prefer for the Christian church to be to have legal recognition. I appreciate the church's tax-exempt status. For instance, I think being a pastor of a church that meets openly rather than in secret has certain advantages. People can observe us, we can speak of our faith freely with our neighbors, and so forth. But is such a legal recognition of Christianity by the state possible without some form of what is called the Constantinian project? I'm not sure. So we'll have to find that as we continue this debate, which will move forward. Any questions in closing? Yes, ma'am. That's a good question. I'm not sure. Yeah. Anyone else? All right, let's close. Lord, we do thank you for your kingdom of grace, which continues to grow in this world. We pray, O Lord, that as we study the past, that our aim would be to be faithful as citizens of your kingdom, and to have that wisdom that you desire for us to have as we seek to make your name known and to worship you in spirit and in truth. Prepare our hearts now, we pray, for our gathered worship in Christ's name. Amen.